Well, you're watching Morning Live. Thanks so much for staying with us this morning. Now, South African taxpayers continue to fork out billions of rands to bail out state-owned enterprises due to a significant decline in the performances of these SOEs. And Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan revealed in Parliament that the government had provided 233.6 billion rand in bailouts for SOEs over the last 5 years, with power utility Eskom taking the lion's share. Now, the only company which actually paid dividends to government was Safcol, which declared a 1 million rand dividend at its 2021-2022 AGM. South Africa's SOEs have a long history of battling issues such as poor management and, of course, high levels of debt, which have put substantial strain on the country's national budget. And this begs the question, can government walk away from these weakening SOEs? So to help us discuss this, we're joined virtually by Jo Mitchell-Marais, Turnaround and Restructuring Leader at Deloitte Africa, as well as Dr. Bheki Mfeka, who's an International Business Consultant and Strategist at SE Advisory. Jo and Dr. Mfeka, thanks so much to both of you for joining us this morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you for having us, Sakina.
So let me first just get your reaction, both of you, to what was revealed by Minister Pravin Gordhan, and also the fact that a 1 million rand dividend from Safcol is all that government has to show for the hundreds of billions that it has used to bail out SOEs. Let me start with you, Jo.
Oh, thank you very much. 1 million rand dividend is a dismal performance by any definition. However, for me, what we need to just keep front of mind is the 233 billion that has gone into state-owned enterprises. I think there is a debate in terms of what the objective of state-owned enterprises is. Is it necessarily to declare a dividend or just to be financially viable and service delivery? But the fact that they drained 233.6 billion from the fiscus, for me, is the critical issue here.
And I think that point is important as well, Jo, because yes, as you say, we need to understand whether there is a profit imperative for these SOEs. But at the same time, if we are spending that much money, what are we getting in return? Are we even getting the service delivery we speak of? But Dr. Mfeka?
Yes, thank you so much. I think the challenges are historical and they still persist. We are here because of the problems we know: corruption, structural and operational inefficiencies, lack of oversight and accountability, and political interference. Those are the four fundamental issues that has led us to be where we are. Because when you bail out a state-owned enterprise and you have these problems persisting, then you are simply fueling them. In other words, you are reinforcing bad behavior because they know they will come back and Treasury will be forced to bail them out, even though they are very important in the economy. They are very important. Some of them, not all of them.
So let's talk about that behavior and, of course, the enabling of this bad behavior. Because one would imagine that these SOEs at some point in their life were actually functional. So what is it that has gone so horribly wrong? Dr. Mfeka, let me ask you that question before I get back to Jo.
Well, probably you have to look at it from history. When we took over, the ANC government took over the bureaucracy. It inherited the apartheid bureaucracy, which was already set out for what it was supposed to be doing. Then the ANC, new in running government, had to take over, had to deploy cadres, comrades who understand its intentions and who want to implement policies of the ANC. In the process, because of the complexity of the transformation project, we didn't even try. I mean, even the attempts were there to transform these SOEs. We're still struggling to transform them. So we're inheriting the challenges of deployment, the challenges of rampant corruption that are happening in the society, and also poor leadership. So we need good leadership to emerge out of all this chaos. And it all starts with leadership and it ends with leadership.
So that's an interesting question, because if we haven't found it yet, where's it supposed to come from? But Jo, to come to you, and you spoke about the objectives of having these SOEs. Why is it that we find ourselves in a constant state of SOE bailouts in South Africa? And the question, of course, can government walk away from these weakening SOEs? And if so, which ones then could government strategically walk away from?
So what we've written about previously is that we believe that there are a certain set of SOEs which are absolutely critical to the functioning of our country. And those ones you cannot walk away from. But equally, speaking to the behavioral aspect, you cannot just continue to provide bailout after bailout. You know, bailout needs to come with certain conditions, certain funding requirements, and a plan, a turnaround plan to return itself to financial performance and profitability. So in what we are saying is there's almost a triage required. Which are the state-owned enterprises that we fundamentally have to protect? You cannot walk away from those, but you cannot just keep funding them and kicking a can down the road. They need a plan to resolve their issues, and that does include leadership. I'm absolutely in agreement on that matter. Then there are other state-owned enterprises that I think could be viable in the medium term. They too need a plan to get to that position, and perhaps at that point in time it prepares them for readiness for the private sector. Those are the ones that you could look to sell perhaps and return some money back to the fiscus. And then there are other state-owned enterprises. I mean, there are a vast number of them that perhaps we do not need, and those need to be prepared for closure. So it's almost a triage.
Let's pick up on some of what you've mentioned there, Jo. So you talk about, for example, those that are ready for the private sector. The private sector can pick up and, you know, maybe save us a bit of money one way or another. So part of the response from Minister Pravin Gordhan and an overview of the bailouts that were received by some of these SOEs. I'm just going to run through a few. So Eskom, 181.6 billion rand. No dividends, no surprises. Denel, 9 billion rand. Safcol, they of course got no bailouts, the only ones to actually give that 1 million rand in dividends back to the state coffers. SAA, 37.1 billion. Transnet, 5.8 billion, and Alexcor, well, we'll come to Alexcor. But SAA, let's use that as an example. So we've spent the bailouts 37.1 billion rand on SAA. Then we were told about the Takatso consortium and their 51% stake that they would acquire in SAA. Well, it's been a few years later, and we're still trying to dot the I's and cross the T's in that particular deal. So how is government benefiting from selling an entity that we have spent 37.1 billion rand in bailouts on and selling it at, what was it said, you both can correct me, 51 rand? Is that what we sold it for? So how does that work? Okay, Jo, you can go, and then Dr. Mfeka, you can come in.
I have a lot of views on SAA. So first of all, SAA was hopelessly insolvent. So there is also a notion that I believe that getting 1 rand for it is a lot. It was worth nothing. It went into business rescue. The challenge with business rescue at the state-owned enterprise is that business rescue is governed within the Companies Act, Chapter 6, and a state-owned enterprise is subject to the PFMA. The two do not work together. A business rescue practitioner has to be able to exercise his duties, and it does not require shareholder approval. That is contrary to PFMA. So if you're asking why is this taken so long, this transaction was not concluded within business rescue. In my opinion, a business rescue practitioner needs to be able to exercise their duties and conclude whether it be a distressed sale within the bounds of business rescue and have an efficient process, one that meets with the timelines. I think we're all frustrated with what's happened with SAA, and until we have some transparency in terms of the numbers to really determine what is the process been since it emerged from business rescue to now, what that looks like from a cash perspective, I think it's very difficult to judge. But from where I stand, it was in business rescue, it was an insolvent entity. It had no value.
Dr. Mfeka, your view on that one?
Yeah, SAA is a very difficult and complex situation there because of lack of transparency. Because we know that business rescue failed. It was not rescued, actually. According to the information we have, what we know is that a new airline was started. It's still called SAA, and the government, National Treasury, had to pay the debt that was owed by the previous airline. So the new airline is an unknown entity, and that's why there's controversy around even that 51 rand, which it would suggest that it was just kind of a dodgy deal, if I can put it that way, because the liability is still on the state, or is still, of the previous airline was taken up by the state. The new airline, it's kind of an inheritance of the assets, basically, for the new owners. So it's a very controversial deal, if I can say, from the outside point of view.
And isn't this then an example of the complexity around the SOEs and how to deal with them going forward? You look at Eskom as an example. We now have the unbundling, but as it stands, is that going to be the solution for Eskom? Because Eskom, like any of the other SOEs, one would imagine, needs to be strategically dealt with. The act that established Eskom was very clear on how it was meant to be run. And once we deviated from that, Eskom went from being the best power utility in the world to now being an absolute basket case, and who knows, probably the worst in the world. So when it comes to legislation, Dr. Mfeka, how can that assist us with these ailing SOEs?
Yes, the good thing with SOEs, we have best practice internationally. So we're not reinventing the wheel. And the studies that have been done in South Africa show that if we do this thing properly, do an SOE legislation that is cutting edge for these times, and also be able to be transparent. Because if you're using taxpayers' money to fund these SOEs, to capitalize them, you need to be very transparent. Currently, there is no transparency. We know that some of them are being bailed out, some of them are let to die. And there's no clarity whether you're privatizing, rationalizing, what's the programs, what are the timelines for the programs to rationalize or transform the SOEs. They are very critical given the structure of the South African economy, and that many people are unemployed. There are many inequalities and all of those things. You need to use them wisely. You need a very capable state to run these SOEs effectively to deal with the challenges that we're facing.
But at what point does the state say that this is a critical issue? We have to fix the SOEs that are strategically critical to delivering on the promises that were made to the masses of this country. And at what point do you say, okay, this is something that the state can do without and will walk away? Because there's just so much that just doesn't make sense in the way in which government is going about dealing with these SOEs. You look at the bailouts called the recapitalizations, and they granted to implement these turnaround strategies, of which we've seen many. and with no positive results at the end. You're also looking at repaying debt, the government guarantees that go with this. But where's the improvement in liquidity? Where's the capital for expenditure at the end of the day? And one has to ask then, Jo, what is the consequence of walking away from some of these historically cash-hungry SOEs, given how much taxpayers have had to fork out to keep them afloat?
Well, I think there needs to be an assessment done to really determine what is the consequence of walking away. What does that look like? Because there is a cost involved in walking away as well. So there needs to be a comprehensive review of the state-owned entities and those that fall into the bucket of, not critical to the country, not ready for the private sector, cannot get to a state of being ready for the private sector. Those, they need to be closed down. As I say, that comes at a cost, but that cost needs to be weighed up against what it's going to take to keep them going in terms of continued bailouts. If they're not capable of being turned around, then hard decisions need to be made. And the challenge with hard decisions is that they are best made, quickly and implemented efficiently.
But of course, we're not doing that. These SOEs have been bleeding for the longest time, and the diagnoses have been done over time, but we just continue, we carry on. And even as the taxpayers, we are somewhat complicit in this because we keep looking on and, nodding our heads as the madness continues. But as far as the citizens are concerned, Dr. Mfeka, what would happen, just to paint a scenario for us, in terms of citizens having to bear the cost if government wants to reduce these bailouts? What would that mean for the citizens? How would that impact us?
For critical SOEs, like Eskom, for instance, it's clear if you don't intervene, you lose electricity at this point in time. It's too big to fail. And many others. The post office currently is under business rescue, and so on and so on. So what it will take for citizens, for instance, is to look out as we go to elections, look at the manifesto, see what the parties are saying about SOEs. Because they are very critical. I said previously, when the new administration came in, that if there's anything important for the leadership to take into account is the transformation of SOEs. What is the practical plan with timelines that is in place that the leadership is pinning their objectives and plans on, so that you rescue the economy, basically. Because, they are sinking the economy. Eskom alone is sinking the economy. So if all the parties, I hope they are listening to this interview, all the parties must come up with a manifesto that is clear on SOEs, what they are going to do, so that when they take office, like in the United States, when the president comes into office, he signs executive orders. You need this precise interventions that are 5-year term and beyond on SOEs.
Well, we're unfortunately out of time, but I do thank both of you for your time this morning. And this, of course, very important conversation that needs to continue. And again, just looking at those numbers. So since 2021-2022, government has spent 233.6 billion rand to bail out our SOEs, and only 1 million rand was returned to state coffers by way of dividends, and that was from Safcol. So in essence, a total return of minus 99.99957%, virtually losing everything. And if you take that a little further, since 2013-2014, 331 billion rand is what we've spent in bailouts. So tell us your thoughts at Morning Live SABC. But also thank you to Dr. Bheki Mfeka, International Business Consultant and Strategist at SE Advisory, and Jo Mitchell-Marais, Turnaround and Restructuring Leader at Deloitte Africa, for talking to us about those billions of rands used in bailouts.